or just something that your NGO is working on right now. And then we'll loop back around and ask everyone if we can come up with a question and really delve into how you might answer it. So I'll give a kind of a brief overview of using R in quantitative research because my background is in quantitative analysis. So I will just say, as I mentioned before in the previous recorded video, I know some of the slides cut out, unfortunately, so you might not have seen all of it. But R uses packages that are built for specific functions. And the reason it does that is because it wants to be as efficient as possible, because you can't load in all the many, many functions that are available, or your computer would slow down an incredible amount. So really, you kind of pull in just what you need for the thing that you're doing and then nothing else. So there are a ton of different packages that you can bring in R because it was developed in the early 90s by statisticians, and it's open source. So a lot of people contribute packages and have that reviewed, and then pretty much anyone in the world can download and use them themselves. But a lot of the kind of stuff that you would normally be using for data analysis is really just covered in the base packages in R, which is called base R. So, essentially if we're, looking at a data set and we want to just produce some kind of simple sample statistics and maybe produce some visualizations, univariate, multivariate tests, a lot of that you can do in just the base R packages, or maybe a plotting package like ggplot2. But in addition, if we want to turn to something that's a little more, statistically rigorous, like inferential analyses, if we're doing any sort of modeling of the actual relationships between two different variables, then you can use one of the many packages for, regression analyses or logistic regression or their extensions to really test those relationships out. But today we're not going to get into inferential statistics. We're just going to talk about kind of a very basic process for taking data in and understanding it in the context of a research question. So the research question I have here is kind of just like a toy research question, kind of a silly one, because we think they probably aren't at least causally related. So the question here is there a relationship between age and the organization type represented in conference registrants here? So I'm actually using the data that we collected on everyone who registered. So you may or may not be in this data set yourself if you register based on when you registered for the conference. And for the sample here, we're basically looking at 92 registrants. We have some questions about, location, where you, the services that you provide, where you reach, the age range, gender, and organization type. So kind of the general idea, like a loose guideline of steps for what you would do to carry out some quantitative analysis would be, first getting a handle on the data that you have. Data can come in many different formats, but probably most of you are familiar with data in a tabular form, right? That means looking at data in Excel, whether it's something like aggregate statistics, like a table that someone put together, or it could be even the individual level data. And individual level data essentially looks like one person is each row, is a row, and each column is a response to a survey question. So, after we've actually got the data into R, you generally want to describe it, look at what's going on, find outliers, and look at the distributions, and then manipulate the data. And if you have any questions that you're really interested in answering, at that point, you would, look at this kind of final step, which is running inferential models. And we're not going to get to that today, but we should be able to run through the first 4 of the steps. So as I mentioned here, many of you may be represented in these tables here, or sorry, in these rows here. The data in Excel, looks pretty standardized here, and the way we import that is you can either, write a script, which is what most people would do to programmatically enter data. And the good thing about writing a script is that, one, you can repeat it. So, rather than having to point and click to do your analyses, you can write your script and document the decisions you made in the script inside that script itself. So here you can see on the bottom left here, I'm saying this is the Belize workshop script, and I'm setting my working directory on the computer where I'm going to pull the data in. I'm reading in those packages that I mentioned to you before. So read Excel is one that you would use to actually bring in an Excel table. And these are just some packages to make, produce descriptive statistics and do some plotting. And then I'm running the command that says read Excel and bring in this data set. And I'm calling that data set, .df. Of course, you can, if you look on the top right, you can import data into R manually by using point and click functionality. And it's actually grown and is very easy to use now. So if you are more familiar with point and click analysis from something like SPSS, then using the RStudio GUI is going to be very familiar to you. And then once we've actually got the data in R, you can see in the bottom right here, it pretty much just looks like an analog for what you saw before, except for that now any missing variables are kind of, or values in our variables are explicit within NA there. And we have a little bit of information on what the actual variable looks like. All right, so to describe our variables of interest here, organization type and age range, I'm just going to run some basic commands from the summary tools package. So the first one I'm running here is this frequency command. And what that's doing is giving us just a univariate distribution of the data that we're looking at here. So if we look at the very first variable, this organization type, you can see that understandably, because this is a conference about CSOs and NGOs, at least more than half of our participants work at an NGO. But we do have reasonable representation from private sector, local governments, and central governments and academia. And then looking at our age range variable, unfortunately I don't have this sorted in this graphic here, but what we'll see in the next slide is that age is actually pretty normally distributed here, which just means that it follows a Gaussian curve, which means most of the observations fall in like the middle of the variable. So here we can see that the plurality of people are in this 30 to 39 age range. And then, the ones that come alongside of it have greater representation. And evidently we have at least one person who's under 18. So I didn't know if we'd have any kiddos in the group today. We may. All right, so in order to visualize variables, and I'll share these, actually I'll share the script that I used to create this and the data with everyone after if you'd be interested in seeing it. But to visualize our variables of interest, I'm using ggplot2. This was developed by Hadley Wickham, and it's kind of a key part of what they refer to as the tidyverse series of packages in R, which are a convenient set of packages that you can use to manipulate data and visualize it and produce analyses. So here what we're looking at is just a histogram of the variables here. And as we mentioned before, we can see most here on the left, most people are coming from NGOs. And then if we look at the data here as well, it looks relatively normally distributed. So you can see most people are falling in that 30 to 49 age range. So in order to do some very kind of basic descriptive tests on the data to look at this bivariate relationship, what we would want to do would be to look at a cross tabulation of the data. We're not going to actually do anything beyond that point, but really what you would want to do is to test, is my data distributed randomly across this groups, or is it distributed kind of uniquely? Meaning we have higher concentration of organizations based on certain age groups. And so what you can see here is that we do have kind of a slightly significant result at this p-value of less than 0.05, which means that it's likely that this data is not by chance. Rather, the distribution that we have is not due to chance. And realistically, given the fact that we have the population of registrants here, you don't really need to take in too much of like statistical theory here, because we actually are not drawing from a sample, but we've got pretty much everyone that is at the conference. And so if we actually want to look at that visually, what we can see is that if people in the private sector and others have very few, actually none, like no participants that are under 30. And that is likely kind of what's driving this statistically significant result of difference here. Whereas you do see a decent amount of participants in the 18 to 29 range from academia, central government, local government, and from NGOs as well. So that's most likely what is driving this, this result. Of course, we don't think necessarily that your age determines your participation in private sector or academia. And if we wanted to do a real analysis of it, we would include and control for a whole host of other variables. So this doesn't show any sort of causality and really just is saying the two happen to be associated with each other. All right, so I'm going to turn it over. So just in general, that was just a brief walkthrough of how to do some basic statistical analyses in R. And now I'm going to turn it over to Renata, who's going to walk through qualitative research.
Yes, thank you, Chris. Are there, does anyone have any questions about any of the slides? I know that at first sight, it may seem a lot, all the graphs, and it looks all fancy. So if there's any questions, this session is, we would have quite a number of some time to discuss. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now, or you can just write them down and we will answer them to the best of our capability later. Is there anyone with any questions right now about the quantitative piece that Chris just reviewed? Well, no. Okay. Well, Chris, let's go to the next slide then.
Sure.
So I will talk about the qualitative research. So I guess the easiest way for me to differentiate between quantitative and qualitative research is quantitative could be more about numbers, while qualitative is more about text and quotes and different types of information. Let me close my window because it keeps beeping. So RDQA is a free R package for qualitative data analysis. So this is still the same R package that we talked about in the big session. This has just a special component for the qualitative data. And just to remind you, it is free. I copied here a link to the page where you can download this package, and they provide detailed information about how to install it and how to use it. I also encourage you, if anyone is interested in trying this, you can also Google, go to YouTube and Google some tutorials. There are some really good tutorials. They will give you step-by-step how you install this RDQA package and how you can use it. It is a pretty easy to use tool that will assist you with the analysis of text data. So this, when you have a long interview, you have a transcript, and you want to analyze that. And it has multiple features. I only listed here a few that are most practical, and these are the features that I used primarily when I was working on the qualitative data analysis. But you can organize codes into code categories. You could organize files into file categories. You can put like little post-its memos to kind of either write down notes for yourself or write down notes for someone that maybe you were working with on this. It is always a good practice to have few people code the same material, just because it's very easy to miss things. You can search files by keywords, and you can highlight keywords, and you can put any categories for any type of information you may be working. Next slide, Chris, please. So maybe we thought that maybe it would be easier if we think about quantitative and qualitative research when we have like a solid examples. So for the qualitative research, this is an example. This overall, my piece comes from a study that was we actually completed in a region in Central America. Just like Chris, for his portion of his presentation, he used our registration data. I am actually showing some pieces of our actual study that we did on suicide. We have heard, or we were informed that there's a certain region in Central America where, for some reason, there is the suicide rates are much higher than anywhere else in the country or in the region. So we thought, why don't we take a look at it and see if that's the case, and if so, what is so special or different about that region that there are so many suicides. So our research question was, what are the individual level, familial level, and community level factors that motivate people in the region to commit suicide? To our knowledge, we didn't have that data available to answer our research question. That's why we knew we had to develop some data collection tool that will provide the information that we need. So we've decided to develop qualitative or semi-structured interviews with professionals working in the region. So because this is about suicide, it's a very sensitive topic. We knew that we had to approach it with a high level when it comes to the ethics. We didn't want to re-traumatize anybody. So we've decided that we will ask professionals who work with survivors or who work with family members who have committed suicide. So then we developed the guide, and some of the interview questions that were pertaining specifically to answer our research questions were, why do you think people commit suicide around here? And then just to prepare, just in case people are not very talkative and they don't want to provide a lot of information, is there anything that makes living here difficult? Can you think of any other reasons? Tell me more about that. So this is just to trigger so people share a little bit more. And then another question, how is the reason people commit suicide here different from other areas, other regions? And then the probe, why? Because, you know, for this question, people can say yes, and that's it. So we want to know why, just to get them talking. And we can look at the next slide. So these are steps. So first, we recorded our interviews. So our first step was to transcribe qualitative interviews. You want to have a transcription that is word for word, because this way you will capture the actual data. So the first step is to transcribe qualitative interviews. The second step is upload your interviews into RDQA, and then you will create codes. Then you will review all the interviews, all the transcripts, and mark them up with relevant codes. And then you will review and tally your codes. What's good about this software, the RDQA, is that you can come up with some codes to start you with that are obvious. Like, you know, when you sit and think, what would make one person commit suicide? I don't know, maybe relationship problems, maybe alcohol or drug abuse. So you can come up with some that you think are correct, and you create them in RDQA, but then as you read those transcripts, you see that your respondents provided you different ideas, so you can add those codes as you go. So it's not like you have to have your code book ready and final at the very beginning. So these are the steps, and we'll look at some examples now. So these are steps 3 and 4. So on the left-hand side, you see our codes. And here we had, so it's a little cut out, so it's not very clear, but our reason for suicide was labeled as B2. And then we had these B21 would be infidelity, B210 relationship problems, B211 lack of employment. So you can see all these different reasons that were provided us that we were able to find in our transcripts. And then on the right-hand side, you can see one of the interview marks up. So this is interview number 2. So we basically go through the whole interview with knowing that this is the information we're looking for. And there's a way to just highlight the paragraph, highlight the whole sentence or just one word to look and to mark it up with the correct, sorry, that's like beeping all the time. I can't stop my messages.
Sorry, that's our Microsoft Teams again.
Yeah, I know. I thought I turned it off, but the messages keep coming. Sorry about that. So on the right-hand side, you can see the actual interview, and then you can see these categories. I mean, we are focusing for this example only about the reasons for suicide, so look for categories listed as number 2, but you can see, like here on this, in this piece, there's a category B28 in orange, and somewhat in the middle of it, and it's marked as drugs. So you can see the whole in blue means that it's like the whole paragraph they're talking about how drugs influence suicide. So it's a time, it requires time because you have to read, but you have to also pay attention while you're reading. So it's easy to miss. And it's always good to have someone else read after you and just confirm that you didn't miss anything. And then the next step is, can we go to the next slide, Chris?
Yeah.
So then we go in to step number 6. So then we finished marking up all our interviews, and now we are interested to see, okay, so what kind of results do we have? So RDQA gives you this option of clicking, again, on the left-hand side of the monitor, you have all these categories. So you can click any of these categories, and then on the right-hand side, all those categories that were marked up as such will pop up. So on the very top of the page, you have, so this was, I clicked category B26, family problems abuse, and it says that we had 26 quotes coded as such from 15 files. I guess it's important to mention that we collected 19 interviews total. So this one tells you that in 15 files, that reason was mentioned. And then in interview 1, someone said they have family issues. That was coded. In interview 1, a little bit later in the interview, they say maybe because of lack of motivation, because lack of motivations with the family. Yes, because of lack of communication, I say, because they make that decision. And then interview number 3, they say it is mostly because of family problems. And you can review, and then if you can see that some of it doesn't make sense, you can revise it and just confirm that your coding is correct. And then
we may need to wrap up because I think we're about to get pulled back into the
session. Are we 5 minutes already?
Yeah, we're close.
Okay, let's go to the next thing. Just to show the results, this is our results graphic that we presented for our final report. And then we will be sharing this presentation so you will see what kind of results we produced. So yes.
So yeah, I don't know if we'll actually have time to go through this, but we were hoping to probe everyone here to ask, what is your own research question? What is the research question that's driving your organization? And then specifically, what data would you need to collect to answer that question? Where can you get it? And then really, is the question answered quantitatively or qualitatively or in some mixture of both? So I think we're going to get pulled in pretty quickly, but we might be able to address one, so we can try it. Is there anyone that wants to volunteer a question? You can unmute yourself and just say, my research question is XYZ. And if not, we do have some kind of
Let's do an example.
generic
Yeah.
question.
Oh.
Sorry, got some
Yeah.
green?
I was just gonna say, just something quickly that's always interested us has been in again, this theme of merging the environmental and social, which environmental really includes social, but the more sort of things that affect biodiversity. But one of the questions are, you know, what are the factors that really influence the behavior of people to, for example, dispose of trash properly? We see that there's many campaigns around the country that deal with, for example, don't litter. It's not good to litter. You need to keep a clean yard. You need to keep a clean city. And yet every day you drive around and you still see school children just throwing trash everywhere. So there's clearly, there can be factors related to, for example, the environment and whether there's trash cans, but I suspect that there's heavy familial reasons like your upbringing and, you know, what's practiced in your community. And we don't really have a good handle on that to sort of design interventions. So that would be a really good question. Similar to what you asked, what are the sort of societal and familial factors that, you know, affect?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think it would be a really interesting conversation if you had a minute, but it seems like we are getting pulled back. Well, hopefully, Elma, that we provided you some inspiration and ideas in terms of how we handled
the quality